When I was in 10th grade, my family packed up our life in the suburbs and moved out to this small community deep in the woods. It was one of those places that looks like a postcard during the day, all sunshine filtering through these giant pine trees and the smell of damp earth. But man, when the sun went down, it was a different world. The isolation was thick, you could feel it. Our new house was my parents' dream, mostly because of these huge, floor-to-ceiling picture windows that wrapped around the living room. My mom was obsessed with the uninterrupted view of nature. They flat out refused to get curtains. "Honey, who's gonna be looking?" "The deer," my dad would joke. So every night, our family life was just on display for the pitch-black forest. It was like we were living on a brightly lit stage, and the whole world outside was a dark, empty auditorium. At first, it just felt a little weird, but you get used to it. Or so I thought. You just kinda tell yourself it's peaceful, that the darkness is empty, and you learn to ignore the feeling of 1,000 unseen eyes. Things started getting weird right around the time the leaves turned that deep, crunchy brown in mid-autumn. My little sister, Chloe, who was 12 at the time, started getting really freaked out. She'd come running to my parents, whispering about seeing faces in the windows at night. Not like a clear person, but more like a pale shape in the reflection, a smudge that looked too much like a face, looking in from the dark. We all did the typical older family thing. We blew her off. "It's just the light hitting the glass weird, sweetie," my mom would say. My dad would tell her she was watching too many horror movies on her tablet. I even teased her about it, calling her a scaredy cat. But she was dead serious, and she started refusing to walk down the hallway at night by herself, because the big window at the end of it was just a giant sheet of blackness. She swore something was out there, watching us. We just told her she had an overactive imagination, but looking back, I feel so damn guilty for not listening to the pure, gut-level terror in her voice. Then the glitches started. Little things you could explain away if you tried hard enough, started happening around the house. I remember my mom getting frustrated because a brand new, full gallon of milk she'd just bought was half empty the next morning. Nobody copped to it. A few days later, a whole sleeve of Oreos disappeared from a freshly opened package. My parents just laughed it off, making jokes about having growing kids with hollow legs, and how we were eating them out of house and home. But Chloe and I would look at each other, 'cause we knew neither of us had done it. That feeling of being watched, it wasn't just my sister's thing anymore. I started feeling it too, like a prickle on the back of my neck when I'd be in the living room late at night doing homework. I'd get this overwhelming urge to turn around, to check the window, but I was too scared of what I might actually see. It felt like our home wasn't just ours anymore. It felt like we were sharing it with someone, who was just on the other side of the glass. The tipping point came on a cold Saturday afternoon. My dad was outside getting firewood, and I saw him stop dead by the edge of our yard. We had this flimsy little wire fence, more to mark the property line than to keep anything out. He was just staring at a spot where the fence was bent completely down to the ground, like something heavy had been stepping over it, again and again, in the same exact spot. It wasn't broken like a deer had crashed through it. It was deliberately pressed down. He yelled that he was going to go check it out, probably thinking it was just kids making a shortcut through the woods. He disappeared into the thick brush that bordered our yard, and he was gone for what felt like an eternity. I was watching from the kitchen window, and when he finally came back out of the tree line, his whole posture had changed. The casual weekend swagger was gone. He walked slow and stiff, and his face was as white as a sheet of paper. He didn't even pick up the firewood he'd dropped. He just walked straight to the back door, fumbled with the lock, and stepped inside without saying a word. He locked the deadbolt behind him, a sound that was so out of place for the middle of the day, and just stood there for a second, breathing hard. "Get away from the windows," he said, and his voice was this low, shaky thing I'd never heard from him before. "Both of you. Now." He finally told us what he found. Tucked back in a thicket of bushes, maybe 50 feet from our main living room window, was a little hideout. A nest. There were empty cans of Bean Weenies and Campbell's soup scattered on the ground, waxy bread wrappers, and a few crumpled up newspapers used for padding. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the small, wooden step stool sitting right in the middle of the clearing. It was our stool, the one my grandpa had made for the old shed. It had been stolen from right under our noses, and it was positioned perfectly, angled just so, that whoever was sitting on it had a perfect, unobstructed view straight into our living room, right where we watched TV every night, and even a clear shot down the hallway toward our bedroom doors. He had been watching everything. We called the cops. I'll never forget the sight of the patrol cars flashing red and blue lights pulsing against the trees, looking totally alien in our quiet woods. The officer listened to my dad's story, walked out to the spot, and came back looking grim. He said, based on the amount of trash, that this guy had likely been living in our old shed or just camping out there for days, maybe even weeks. He had been watching our routines, when we left, when we came home, what we did at night. He knew us. The officer's words just hung in the air. This guy was settling in. The comforting illusion of our safe little house in the woods was shattered into a million pieces. That very night, my dad went to the hardware store and bought the thickest, heaviest blackout curtains they had for every single window in the house. The learning from all of it was just dark and heavy. You grow up thinking that your home is your safe space, a given. But it's not. Safety isn't just something you have by default. It's something you have to be active about, something you have to build and fight for, because you never, ever know who's out there in the dark, just watching and waiting. This story took place during my last year of high school, while I was living in a rural area where the walk back home from the bus stop was long, quiet, and surrounded by wooded hills. I didn't mind the walk. The silence was comforting, a way to decompress after a long day of classes and dealing with, high school stuff. It was my time. The road was mostly dirt and gravel, snaking through these old-growth forests that felt ancient, and our house was one of the last ones on the route. That late autumn air had a certain smell to it, a mix of damp earth, decaying leaves, and pine that I'll never forget. It was the kind of quiet where you could hear a squirrel drop a nut from 50 yards away, where the only real sound was the crunch of your own feet on the fallen leaves and the whisper of the wind through the nearly bare branches. It was peaceful, or at least, that's what I used to think. That feeling of being completely alone, out in the middle of nowhere, was part of the charm. It felt like my own little world, separate from everything else. On this one fall afternoon, as the sun began to set, turning everything into these incredible shades of orange and gold, I was on the part of the road where it went up a steep incline, what we all called the climb. This stretch was always the toughest part of the walk, and the woods here felt thicker, closer, like they were leaning in over the road. The shadows got real long and weird, stretching out like fingers across the gravel. At first, the silence was total. Just complete, dead quiet except for my own breathing and the rhythm of my footsteps. But then, I started to hear something else. It was a constant sound of leaves being stepped on, slow and deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It wasn't frantic or hurried. My first thought was, oh, it's just a deer. We saw them all the time, wandering near the tree line, so I didn't think much of it and just kept walking, maybe humming a little tune to myself, trying to get my mind off how much my legs were starting to burn from the hill. But as I picked up my pace a little, just wanting to get home before it got properly dark, the sound sped up too. When I slowed down, trying to catch my breath, it slowed down with me. The rhythm matched my own exactly, like a perfect, creepy echo coming from just inside the woods to my right. My heart started to pound in my chest. A cold, heavy feeling settled in my stomach. This wasn't a deer. Animals don't mimic you. They have their own cadence, their own way of moving. This was intentional. I instinctively moved over to the middle of the road, as far from the tree line as I could get, my eyes darting towards the darkening woods. The thought of someone just reaching out and grabbing me from the shadows was suddenly very, very real. The whole atmosphere changed. The comforting silence was gone, replaced by this awful, tense awareness that I was not alone, and whoever, or whatever, was with me was playing some kind of sick game. Every nerve in my body was on fire, screaming at me that something was terribly wrong. I decided I had to know for sure, even though every part of me was screaming not to. I stopped, dead in my tracks, planting my feet on the gravel and holding my breath, straining my ears. The sound also stopped exactly when I did, maybe just a few yards behind me and to the side, right where the trees were thickest. The silence that followed was 1,000 times worse than the footsteps. It was a heavy, loaded silence, full of waiting. I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears, the thumping of my heart, so loud I was sure it could be heard from the trees. I was terrified, absolutely frozen to the spot. My mind was racing, picturing who or what could be standing there, just watching me, waiting for me to make a move. For a second that felt like an eternity, nothing happened. The wind rustled the remaining leaves on the trees, and for a split second, it sounded like a whisper. That's what broke the spell. I wasn't going to stand there and find out what happened next. My survival instinct just kicked in, overriding everything else. I decided to run. I didn't think about it, I just bolted. I took off up the climb, my legs burning with lactic acid and my lungs feeling like they were on fire, but I didn't care. I just ran. I didn't dare look back. I was too scared of what I might see. But I could hear it. I could hear the noise running with me, crushed leaves, the sharp snap of twigs breaking under heavy feet. It wasn't just keeping pace anymore. It was right there with me, a chaotic, terrifying symphony of pursuit. It wasn't the sound of another teenager running. It felt heavier, more powerful, and it was keeping up with me on that steep hill without any sign of effort, while I was about to collapse. The sounds were so close, it felt like I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my shoes. It was a blind, pure panic. My whole world narrowed down to the patch of road in front of me, the burning in my lungs, and the horrifying, relentless sound of being chased through the dying light of day. Suddenly, as I was nearing the top of the hill, about to completely give out, I heard a motor. A pair of headlights cut through the twilight, and a familiar car, my neighbor Mrs. Gable's old station wagon, pulled up beside me. She rolled down the window, her face a mixture of confusion and concern, and asked if I needed a ride. I must have looked absolutely terrified, because she didn't even wait for my answer. She just unlocked the door and said, "Honey, get in the car." Now. I practically threw myself into the back seat, slamming the door and locking it, my whole body shaking. As she pulled away, I stared out the back window, down the hill to the spot where I had just been. I saw nothing on the road. The woods were still and dark, looking completely ordinary, as if nothing had happened. But I knew without a single doubt in my mind that something or someone was still there, standing just inside the tree line, watching me go, maybe waiting for me to have reached the top of the hill. I never, ever took that walk home by myself again. I'm a nurse, and like a lot of folks in healthcare, I pull a lot of night shifts. This one night, I was driving home, and the clock on my dashboard read 2:15 a.m. Man, I was just dead on my feet. You know that kind of tired that's so deep it's in your bones? That was me. The 12-hour shift had been a real grinder, and all I could think about was my bed. The world outside my little Honda Civic was completely still. The only sound was the low hum of my engine and the whisper of my tires on the cold, dark asphalt. The streetlights cast these long, spooky, orange-white shadows that made everything look a little off, a little warped. I was on the final stretch, just a few blocks from my house, cutting through one of those quiet residential neighborhoods where all the houses are dark and everyone's asleep. It's the kind of quiet that's usually peaceful, but when you're the only car on the road, it can also feel kinda isolating, like you're the last person on Earth. I had the radio off, just stewing in the silence, my mind a blank slate after a day of nonstop alarms and emergencies. I was just going through the motions, letting muscle memory get me home. That's when I saw it. I was turning onto my street, a narrow little lane lined with parked cars on both sides, and my headlights washed over something in the middle of the road. At first, it was just a dark shape, and my tired brain couldn't really process it. A pile of trash bags? A deer? But as I got closer, the shape resolved itself, and a jolt of ice water went through my veins. It was a person, a man to be specific, lying face down, arms splayed out like he'd just dropped from the sky. My foot instinctively hit the brake, and my whole body tensed up. The nurse in me, that part of your brain that's been drilled with emergency protocols for years, just took over. Check the scene for safety, check for response, airway, breathing, circulation. It's automatic. My hand was already moving toward my hazard lights, my mind flipping through a Rolodex of possibilities. Hit and run, a seizure, maybe an overdose, God forbid a heart attack. He was just lying there, right in the middle of the road, directly under one of those buzzing, unreliable streetlights. The whole scene was just so damn still and silent, it felt like a photograph. My first, overwhelming instinct was to get out and help. It's what I do. It's who I am. But as my car slowed to a crawl about 50 feet away, something else kicked in. A different kind of instinct. A cold, prickly feeling that started at the base of my neck and spread through my whole body. Something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong with this picture. He was too still. I've seen unconscious people. I've seen injured people. I've even seen dead people. There's a certain posture to it. A limpness. This was different. This was a deliberate stillness, like a mannequin that had been carefully placed. There was no sign of an accident, no broken glass, no skid marks, nothing. And I was alone. A woman, not even 100 pounds soaking wet, on a dark street at 2 a.m. with a mystery man on the ground. The thought of getting out of my car, of turning my back on the empty, dark street to kneel over this stranger, suddenly felt like the stupidest, most reckless idea in the world. My training was screaming at me to help, but my gut was screaming louder, telling me it was a trap. Every horror movie I'd ever seen, every news story about a good Samaritan getting hurt, it all flooded my brain at once. I had to make a choice, right then and there. I decided to trust my gut. I let my foot ease off the brake, letting the car creep forward slowly, keeping my doors locked. I grabbed myself from the passenger seat, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. My fingers fumbled with the screen as I dialed 911. The car was barely moving, just inching past the figure on the ground. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. He didn't move a muscle. The dispatcher's voice came on the line, calm and professional. 911, what is your emergency? I tried to keep my own voice steady, explaining where I was, what I saw. A man down in the street, unresponsive. As I was giving her the cross streets, just as I was passing him, I did something that probably saved my life. I glanced at my driver's side mirror, just a quick, nervous check to see if he'd moved. He hadn't, but in the reflection, I saw a flicker of movement from the deep shadows between two parked cars. And then it happened. Bang! A sound so loud it felt like the window exploded next to my head. A face was right there, pressed against my glass. A man, wild-eyed and furious, was yanking on my door handle, his other hand balled into a fist as he slammed it against the window again. Bang! Panic. Pure, absolute, mind-numbing panic. My throat just seized up. I looked in my rearview mirror, and the spot in the road where the body had been was completely empty. He was gone. It was the bait. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't trying to get help. They were trying to get me. He's trying to get in my car. Oh my God, he's trying to get in my car. I screamed into the phone, my voice cracking. The man at my window was shouting something I couldn't understand, his face contorted with rage. The 911 dispatcher's voice cut through my terror, sharp and commanding. Ma'am, drive. Step on the gas right now. Do not stop. Do not go home. Just drive. I didn't need to be told twice. I stomped on the accelerator, so hard the tires screeched on the pavement. I blew right through the stop sign at the end of the block, not even looking. My heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest, and all I could hear was the sound of my own ragged breathing and the calm voice of the woman on the phone, telling me to just keep driving, that officers were on the way. I just drove, making random turns, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes darting to every mirror, expecting to see headlights right on my tail. After what felt like an eternity of circling the neighborhood, my whole body trembling, the dispatcher told me a patrol car had cleared my street, and it should be safe to head back. Safe. The word sounded like a joke. I didn't feel safe at all. I felt like a target, but I couldn't just drive around all night, so I cautiously made my way back. Instead of pulling right into my driveway, I parked half a block away, under the cover of a big oak tree, and killed my engine and my lights. I just sat there in the dark, my heart still hammering against my ribs, and I watched. I scanned the whole street, the sidewalks, the shadowy porches, the spaces between cars. For a couple of minutes, nothing. It was just as quiet as before. I was starting to think maybe they'd just given up and run off. I was just about to grab my purse, ready to make a run for my front door when I saw them. He was back, the man from the road. Only this time, he wasn't alone. He was with two other guys, and they were walking slowly back down the street, fanning out. They weren't talking. They were just hunting. Their heads were on a swivel, scanning everything, their movements slow and deliberate, like predators looking for prey that had escaped the trap. They were looking for my car. They were looking for me. I'm a nurse, and like a lot of folks in my line of work, I pull my fair share of night shifts. So there I was one night, driving home around maybe 2:15 in the morning. That specific time of night has a feeling all its own, you know? It's not just dark, it's empty. The world feels like it's holding its breath. The only sound was the low hum of my beat-up Honda and the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the tires rolling over the seams in the cold asphalt. The air coming through the vents still had that faint, sterile hospital smell, a mix of antiseptic and stale coffee that clings to your clothes and your hair. I was bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that settles deep in your muscles and makes your eyelids feel like they're lined with lead. I was just a few blocks from my house, turning onto one of those quiet, narrow residential streets lined with big oak trees that block out what little moonlight there was. My brain was already on autopilot, thinking about kicking off my shoes, the blessed silence of my apartment, and maybe a bowl of cereal before crashing. It was just another end to another long shift. I was maybe halfway down the block when my headlights landed on something that just didn't belong. It wasn't a raccoon or a knocked-over trash can. It was a person, a man to be specific, lying face down, right in the dead center of the street. He was sprawled out in a way that was all wrong, like a marionette with its strings cut. My nurse brain immediately kicked into high gear, overriding the exhaustion. The whole ABC protocol, airway, breathing, circulation, started flashing in my head like a neon sign. My foot automatically eased off the gas and moved to the brake. My hand, without me even telling it to, was reaching for the hazard light button on the dash. This is what I do. I help. It's a reflex baked into me after years of ER chaos and code blues. But as the car crept closer, slowing to a crawl, this other feeling, something cold and prickly, started crawling up my spine. It was a deep, primal sense of wrongness that had nothing to do with medical training and everything to do with instinct. It was the absolute, profound stillness of the body. Not the stillness of sleep, but something heavier, deader. I stopped the car about 20 feet away, the beams of my headlights painting the scene in a harsh, sterile light. I was alone, a 100-pound woman in scrubs on a deserted street at 2 in the morning. And that's when the details started screaming at me. There were no skid marks on the pavement, no shattered glass from a windshield, no twisted metal of a bicycle or a motorcycle nearby. It was just him, placed there. It felt staged, like a scene from a movie, and the thought made the hair on my arms stand up. Every instinct, every fiber of my being was telling me, don't get out of the car. My training was at war with my survival instinct. The helper in me wanted to check for a pulse, to render aid. But the woman in me, the one who's heard all the horror stories, was picturing a dozen different terrible scenarios. My hand dropped from the hazard button and shakily, slowly, reached for my cell phone instead. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence of my car. I decided I'd call 911, give them the location, and let the pros handle it. I could be a good witness from the safety of a locked vehicle. With the phone pressed to my ear, the dispatcher's calm voice a bizarre counterpoint to my own ragged breathing, I started to describe what I was seeing. Yes, a man. He's lying face down in the middle of Elm Street. As I was talking, I did a quick, reflexive check of my mirrors. A habit. I glanced at the passenger side mirror. Nothing but a dark lawn. Then I glanced at the rearview mirror to get another look at the man on the road, to see if I could offer any more detail. But the spot where he had been lying was empty. The asphalt was bare. For a split second, my brain just couldn't process it. Did I imagine him? Was I that tired? And in that microsecond of confusion, it happened. Bang! An explosion of sound right next to my head that was so loud it felt like a physical blow. I screamed, dropping the phone onto the passenger seat. A man was right there, his face pressed against my driver's side window, his eyes wide and furious. He slammed his fist against the glass again, the window flexing inward, and with his other hand, he was yanking violently on the door handle. It was the trap. The man on the ground wasn't the victim, he was the bait. He's trying to get in my car. Oh my God, he's trying to get in. I shrieked, fumbling for the phone, my voice cracking with pure, ice-cold panic. The dispatcher, her voice suddenly sharp and urgent, was yelling back at me, "Ma'am, drive. Just drive now. Don't stop, don't go home, just go." I didn't need to be told twice. My foot stomped on the accelerator, so hard the engine screamed, and the tires screeched on the pavement. I blew right through the stop sign at the end of the block, not even looking, the world outside becoming a terrifying, blurry smear of dark houses and streetlights. I could hear the dispatcher talking, her words a lifeline, telling me to keep driving, to make a few turns, that she was sending a patrol car to my neighborhood. I just kept driving aimlessly, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I circled the blocks for what felt like an eternity, my eyes darting to every mirror, expecting to see headlights right on my tail. After a few minutes, the dispatcher told me a car was in the area and that it was probably safe to head back, to just be cautious. Safe. The word sounded like a foreign language. I didn't think I'd ever feel safe again. I approached my street from the opposite end, driving slowly with my headlights off, my heart feeling like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I parked a good half a block away from my apartment building, partially hidden by a big sycamore tree, just to watch. The street was empty now. Quiet. It looked exactly the same as it had 10 minutes ago, but it felt tainted, sinister. I sat there for a minute, my car idling, trying to convince myself it was over. I was just about to kill the engine and make a run for it when I saw them. Movement, down by the corner where it had all happened. It was him, the man from my window. And he wasn't alone anymore. He was with two other men. They weren't running or yelling. They were just walking slowly, methodically, down the sidewalk, their heads turning from side to side. They were scanning the driveways, the front porches, the parked cars. They were looking. They were looking for the car that got away. They were looking for me. I slid down in my seat, my head below the window, my breath caught in my throat. I waited motionless until the sound of their footsteps faded away, and then I ran faster than I ever have in my life, my keys fumbling at the lock before I finally tumbled inside, slamming and locking the deadbolt behind me. Since that night, I lock my doors the second I get in the car. And I learned the hardest lesson of my life. Sometimes, the most helpful thing you can do is to save yourself first. It happened on a particularly cold autumn, the kind where the bite in the air feels personal, and the nights just started showing up way too early, you know? I was living in this small ground-floor apartment on a residential street where the oak trees hung so low they practically scraped the roofs of passing cars, and the streetlights were a complete joke, flickering more than they were ever on. My whole life was basically flipped upside down back then. I was working the graveyard shift at a 24/7 convenience store, a gig that paid the bills but drained every last ounce of life out of me. Every single night, or I guess morning, I'd roll up to my building around 1 a.m., feeling like a zombie, my brain just buzzing from the fluorescent lights and the constant ding of the door chime. That one night, as I was parking my beat-up Civic, I noticed this black sedan. It was just sitting there, maybe 2 blocks down, completely dark, no headlights, nothing. It looked like a void, just sucking in what little light there was on the street. I didn't think much of it at the time. I mean, why would I? It's a city, people park their cars. I just remember getting this little prickle on the back of my neck before I shrugged it off, grabbed my stuff, and hustled inside, doing my little security ritual, deadbolt, chain lock, and a quick peek back out the peephole. I kicked off my shoes, threw my work vest on the chair, and basically collapsed onto my bed without even changing. The exhaustion was so deep it felt like it was in my bones. I was maybe 15 minutes into that weird, half-asleep state when I heard it. It was this low, scraping sound coming from the direction of my kitchen window. Now, my window faced this tiny, closed-off patio area out back, which was surrounded by a high wooden fence, so it was pretty private. The sound was faint, kind of like a branch scratching against the glass in the wind, but there was no wind that night. It was dead still. It stopped after a few seconds, and I immediately started the whole self-talk thing. It's just a raccoon, you idiot. They're always digging around the trash cans back there. I tried to force myself to relax, to let my muscles unclench, telling myself I was just jumpy from being overtired and chugging too much cheap coffee all night. I closed my eyes, picturing a fat raccoon trying to climb the fence, and almost managed to convince myself that's all it was. The silence that followed felt heavy, though, like it was waiting for something. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of quiet that makes you hold your breath because you don't want to miss what comes next. And then it came again. This time it was closer, clearer, and it wasn't just a scrape. It was a slow, deliberate drag, like someone was testing the window screen with a fingernail. And underneath it, I could hear something else, something that made all the air leave my lungs at once, breathing. It was low and raspy, a quiet, steady inhale and exhale that was way too deep and rhythmic to be any kind of animal. That's when the feeling hit me like a physical blow, that gut punch of instinct that screams at you that something is fundamentally wrong long before your brain can catch up and process the danger. I was off the bed in a split second, but I didn't make a sound. It felt like my blood had turned to ice water. Every instinct was telling me to stay put, to hide, but I knew I had to see. I had to know what was out there. I crept out of my bedroom, moving so slowly that my muscles were screaming in protest. The floorboards in that old apartment were a minefield of creaks and groans, and I navigated them like my life depended on it, because in that moment, I was pretty sure it did. My own heartbeat was a drum in my ears, so loud I was terrified he could hear it through the walls. I made it to the edge of the living room, my back pressed flat against the wall. The curtains over the main window were drawn, but there was this tiny gap on the side, a sliver of a view into the darkness of my patio. I took a deep, shaky breath and forced myself to lean forward, just enough to put one eye to the opening. And there he was. A man was standing there in the pitch black of my patio, not 10 feet from my window. He wasn't trying to get in, wasn't moving at all. He was just standing there, perfectly still, a dark silhouette against the faint glow from a distant neighbor's porch light, staring directly at my living room window. He knew I was in there. I could feel it. But that wasn't even the part that made my reality tilt on its axis. The part that truly, deeply terrified me was what he was holding. In his hands, he was holding my welcome mat from my front door. The stupid, cheerful one that said, "Home is where the heart is." He had it folded perfectly in half, holding it under his arm like he was carrying a newspaper he'd just picked up. My brain just short-circuited, trying to understand. He had walked up to my front door, picked up my mat, and brought it around to the back of my apartment to what? To show me he could. My fingers were shaking so bad I could barely unlock my phone, but I somehow managed to dial 911. I cupped my hand over my mouth and the phone, whispering my address to the operator, my voice a tiny, pathetic squeak. The second, and I mean the exact second, the first sound of my voice left my lips, the man on the patio moved. His head snapped up, not toward the window, but toward the wall where he must have heard me, confirming he'd been listening the entire time. He didn't run or panic. He just calmly turned, walked to the back fence with a quiet, confident stride, and disappeared into the deeper darkness of the alleyway behind it. It was the most chilling exit I could ever imagine. The police showed up a few minutes later, their flashlights cutting beams through my now violated space. They searched the whole area, of course, but he was long gone. They didn't find a single thing out of place, except for one. My welcome mat. He'd left it by my small flower bed near the fence, placed neatly on the ground, almost like a gift. One of the cops, a tired-looking older guy, looked at me and said, "Ma'am, it looks like he's been watching you. He's learning your routine." Those words echoed in my head for months. After that night, nothing was ever the same. I couldn't sleep in my bedroom anymore. The window felt like a giant, gaping eye watching me in the dark. I dragged my mattress into the living room and slept on the floor, as far away from any windows as I could get. For months, I lived in a state of constant low-grade terror. Every creak of the old building was him coming back. Every car that slowed down on my street was that black sedan. I started parking in a different spot every night, taking different routes home from work, changing anything I could about the routine he had apparently learned so well. But it didn't matter. The feeling of safety was gone, completely shattered. My home wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was just a set of walls that I now knew were laughably easy to get around. That man didn't break a window or a lock. He broke me. He took my sense of security and proved it was an illusion. I never saw him again, but sometimes, when I'm walking home late at night, I'll see a dark sedan parked on a side street, and that same icy dread washes over me all over again. He's still out there, and he knows my routine.